Well, good afternoon, everybody. We have a tradition for the last few years of having an IOL calculation symposium at the ASCRS meeting. And Richard Packard from England used to run this, and with travel constraints and so on, it was turned over to me for the last couple of them. So really happy to welcome you all here. We wanted to do it differently this year. A couple of introductory talks to kind of set the framework of where we are with new advances in a more condensed way, and then present a bunch of interesting cases. So with that in mind, I'm really pleased to welcome David Cook, who's going to talk to us about what's new in IOL calculation formulas.
Good evening, good afternoon. I have no financial conflicts of interest. If you really like this stuff, get your cameras ready, because there will be a lot of slides that I won't really discuss, and they'll have a lot of information on them. There are a number of ways to categorize IOL power formulas. You can do it by thin lens, thick lens, the method used. Many of them combine methods. Many of them don't tell what the method is. They're secret. So I decided to do it by locations. From Australia, but actually the reason is more on the right side. It's where each of these are found if you're interested in the formula. Panacea is one that's used a lot in Latin America. And we have the T2, the DGS, Castrop, Hygus, Oculix, EOM, Evo 2, VRF, and several from the United States. The newer ones are Hoffer QST, Holiday 2, K6, Lattice, and RBF 3. I asked each of the authors to highlight formulas that they thought might be valuable, and they came up with a big list. All of these are within the last 2 years, and many of them are not yet actually in print, but all of them are available online. For most of you, those will be good bedtime reading. For me, this keeps me awake at night. I love this stuff, and I'm not exactly sure why. My wife says it's because I'm weird. She's probably right. Today, I wanted to discuss things that are new, mainly those things that affect every formula in some way, or at least multiple formulas. So one thing that's new is a website, and there are lens constants that are new. There's some discussion about machine accuracy. And then the last one is the one I always want when I go is, well, what would you do, Doc? So one website coming up is by the European Society of Cataract and Refractive Surgery. And it's basically like the ASCRS has for post-refractive surgery. There'll be one site where you can run 9 or more formulas all with one data entry. And that's not yet developed. It's in the process. Supposedly it'll be a few months, but that probably means a year. Then new lens constants. Many of us have used the ULIB, user group for laser interference biometry. Started and run by Dr. Hygus, and unfortunately he died a couple of years ago, 2.5 years ago. And so that site has not been updated since 2016, but fortunately IOL Con has been. It's also run by a physicist in Germany. Just to show the site, if you're not familiar with it, right here is a Show All Lenses button. And over here, fortunately from my perspective, you don't have to log in to use it. And if you punch that button, it's the Castrop formula, and you can run that one if you're interested. As far as new lens constants, a lot of times you measure an eye, you do a lot of intentionality, there's a lot of intentionality to get just the right formula, and then you have a major disaster and you have to use an anterior chamber lens. And if you look, there are no optimized formulas available on these websites. And so this paper showed how you add 0.4 to your lens constants for optical biometry, and you get better results. Formulas still have problems. Every formula in most big data sets still have more than one eye that's off by more than a diopter. And I believe that the improvements will come incrementally. So we're going to talk about 2 of them today. One is accurate axial length. This idea first came to me by Doug Koch, and it's summing the segments of the axial length. And that's the proper way to do optical biometry, would be to measure the cornea and add it to the anterior chamber depth and add it to the lens. but it does not equal the displayed lens. And this was from their paper, where they sum on the bottom, on the x-axis, is the value written on the machine. On the y-axis is the difference between the two methods. And if the two methods were equal, you should end up with a line, that red line, a 0 all the way across for all axial lengths. But it turns out that the displayed axial length is too short for short eyes and too long for long eyes. So you think, well, you'll just look at the display and add it up and you'll get the sum of the segments, but the problem is they never display the vitreous. So this is a formula that tells you how you can get that. It's a CMAL, and it's a way that you can get it on the displayed values. The Argos gives the sum of segments, but it has a couple of things that have not been tested yet. One is that the refractive indices that the machine uses are for white light. They're not for the measuring wavelength used, which is 1,300, is 1,300 nanometers. Or sorry, it's 1060. And so it may not give the actual accurate results. It's not clear yet. Studies are not enough have been done. But there are a couple formulas how you can go back and forth between the two machines, between the traditional optical biometry and the Argos machine, if you need to. This one now is, that other has to do more with probably what's going to be coming down the road, because if you correct the axial length, some of the formulas use the old axial length and they already have internal corrections, so you may have to correct the corrections. But this one applies to everyone, and this is if you use immersion ultrasound axial length, you should not use your same optical lens constants. So if you use a WF lens from Alcon, you shouldn't use a 119 if you're going to use immersion ultrasound. And you can either change your axial length, or you can subtract 0.23 from the optical A constant. And that's only for long eyes. Holiday 1, Holiday 2, SRKT, they have new Wong-Koch adjusters or new adjusters on their own. And so all those different adjusters, the displayed optical axial length is too long in long eyes compared to them. It's probably too long in reality. And many of those, it's also too short in short eyes. Current machines have some issues. If you look at the lens thickness on the lens star, on this particular machine, I blew it up, it doesn't give the right measurement. My son made a program where you can remove the floor that's in red, and you can see on this same patient, there's a lot of the lens that's missing. The true lens actually starts and stops there, so in this particular eye, the anterior chamber depth is too long, and the lens is too short. A typical lens star spike has these spikes at the front and the back for the capsule, and you should see those on your machine. They're not here. If you don't see them, beware. I'll come back to what you do in a second. The IOL Master has its own issues. This is the 700, and it puts these black lines, these gates at the front of the lens, the back of the lens. The difference between them is the lens thickness. The difference between the corneal spikes is a central corneal thickness. There's your anterior chamber depth. You should look at these spikes. You should look at this printout. It's on your printout from the IOL Master. And you'll see on this particular eye, you can see where the back of the lens truly sits, and yet you see where they put the gates. It's in the wrong spot. The anterior chamber depth is correct on this eye. So when the lens spikes are in question, and you can tell that by looking at the spikes yourself, use a formula that doesn't require a lens thickness or an ACD, and you'll probably get a good result. If you put those bad results into one of the newer formulas, you're going to get a worse result than using the SRKT or the Holiday 1. So run the traditional formulas that don't use a lens thickness or an ACD, or maybe you could use T2. Don't run HIGUS if there's a problem with ACD, and don't run the newer formulas with the lens thickness or the ACD. The companies are aware of this issue. Lastly, if someone were to say, so what's your favorite formula? The one that I've seen work the best in so many different analyses, when it's included, is Oculix, but that's a formula that's primarily on machines. It's very difficult to get and use. So for what's available, if somebody said to me, like my patients do, so what would you do? What I would do for long eyes, and these are only really the long eyes, I would use Olsen on the biometer. That's usually Olsen on the lens star. It's a little more accurate than the Olsen from Phaco Optics. Next, Evo 2, and next would be Kane. For short eyes, these are the really short ones, Kane, K6, or Evo 2. And on everything else, I would use whatever's on my machine. And the reason I would stick with what's on the machine is that there's safety when the machine enters the data and a lot less safety when I'm entering it. So for the majority of the eyes, if your machine has Barrett, use it. Otherwise, Higas or Holiday 1. Thank you.
Thanks, David. We'll have some discussion after the next talk. That was a lot of interesting information.